Morning. It's around about 20 to 4 in the morning. Went to bed at 10 because my body is, I think, is winding down from the guard mode that it's been in for the past 2.5, nearly 3 weeks now. With, shitbag Steve downstairs, who, as far as I know, is still in some form of custody. I mean, 24 hours has passed and they're not allowed to detain without charging for over 24 hours, as far as I know, in this country. So I presume they're perhaps, hopefully, waiting for the mental health team to assess him. Or maybe they've charged him with something. Who knows? It's all good. I phoned the local Labour councillor, Carol, lovely 71-year-old Welsh lady, wonderful accent, obviously very good at politics. She said, "Oh, that's really good. You'll keep me updated, Howard." Yeah, my Welsh accent isn't very good, but oh dear. It's, it's been a day of feeling peace and contentment for the first time in a long time. What it felt like forever. They've been here a month. Anyway, it's enough about him. There is one funny little side tangent before I go on with my subject matter for this morning. The upstairs neighbours, I was having a word with them, Monica upstairs. They're a German couple, nice people. Young, I think probably late 20s, maybe early 30s, so young in comparison to myself. Weird thing to say. And he'd been banging on their door, making complaints. One of these complaints was that he kept hearing the radio between 3 and 5 in the morning. This here is a boarded up fireplace. The chimney goes all the way down to the ground floor flat. And the last neighbours downstairs used to have a massive TV that was hung above the fireplace. And we could often quite clearly hear what was on their telly through the fireplace. I'm wondering if inadvertently I was provoking him by sitting here doing my podcast early morning, normally between about 4 or 5 o'clock, which meant he was passing out on the sofa most nights, wasn't he, rather than going to the bedroom. Well, maybe you should have gone to the bedroom and slept, mate, or maybe she didn't want you sleeping in there. But, that wasn't intentional. But it had an interesting effect. Anyway, subject matter. Relationships between fathers and sons. I think, lucky enough to have had a father who tried his best, I think, to be a father. Many don't. I hear tales from other people. There's a barmaid in one of my local pubs who I was chatting to, whose father, for instance, had 13 children by just about as many different mothers, and was a drunken rogue and really didn't care. And she hinted at darker things, which I will not go into. But my father, he was a difficult man. Passed away January last year after 2 or 3 weeks of illness, on top of the illnesses he had, because he had a brain hemorrhage when I was a teenager. He was in the bath. Just trying to recall. I would have been 15, maybe. My maths is none too good, but you know, it's a long time ago. And you know, he lost consciousness and body function. And he'd been complaining about a headache, and Mum had phoned the local doctors, who said, well, you know, take 2 tablets and go to bed. And then he had this, you know, massive seizure, and it turned out he'd had an aneurysm go in his brain. And they eventually sent him to Maida Vale Hospital in London. Luckily enough, my parents had my mum had an old school friend who lived in Bromley. Husband was quite wealthy, but that didn't stop the two of them from still being friends and keeping in contact. And Mum was able to stay down there with her, and various relatives looked after myself and my younger brother. I don't remember that much about that time, but it must have been a very stressful time. And obviously I don't think we were told much. Although having said that, Mother was very preoccupied with caring for Father and worrying, obviously. And then they removed a portion of his skull to ease the pressure from the bleed on his brain. And I always remember at one point he regained consciousness and tried to pull all the tubes out of his head, and ended up basically giving them a horror show, because as he pulled all the tubes out of his head, he spattered blood all over the wall. Oh dear. And he swore at various nurses when he regained consciousness, and was just very angry and confused, which you would be. He always had a temper, even before the brain hemorrhage. But I would say, other than a couple of slip-ups, especially after drinking, he kept that temper admirably. I think it was his father, my grandfather's military discipline that had been drilled into my father that helped him do that, and I think it's the same with me. But then he ended up with a hole in his skull for quite some time. So my father had this, right about here, this hollow hole with skin over it. And you could see it pulsing. It was kind of cool. Mum was like, don't touch it. And Dad didn't mind, I seem to remember him. He'd cringe a little bit, but me, I'd be like, Really he sees brain pulsing. I was like, well, at least it proves you got one, Dad. Time went on. Morning smoker's cough. And as a side product of the damage that had been done to his brain, he got epilepsy, grand mal. For those who don't know, that is the heaviest form of epilepsy. And I strongly remember I was still a teenager, so I think this must have been within a year of the brain hemorrhage. I think by now he'd had a titanium plate put in there and was very proud of the fact that I've got a bit in my skull that's made of the same material that Concorde had made off my dad and his aircraft. He was a character. He was very proud of that, would boast of it in the pub. Tell anyone who was within range that he had a bit of Concorde in his head. For those who don't know, Concorde was a joint project between, I believe, the French and the British, which is unusual in itself. Salute. World's first supersonic jet airliner. Beautiful looking aircraft, I have to say. And it was tea time. Early 90s, I believe. My father was in his usual position, laying on the sofa, waiting for Mum to serve up tea. Home and Away, the old Australian soap, was on. And I believe it was just me and my father in the front room. I think Brandon was upstairs, my younger brother, and Mum was in the kitchen. And all of a sudden he starts massively fitting. I remember everybody else panicking and me just going, Mum, what do I do? And she sent me running over to some of our neighbours who were close friends. And I got them to phone an ambulance, and I think Ken then came over and it helped try and started helping. And one of his sons, I believe, I think they came over and tried to make sure Dad could breathe. It was a terrifying thing for anybody to witness. And I'd not really absorbed, but been thinking about the lesson. All of a sudden, my dad was not immortal. He was a man. He wasn't always going to be there. And this just hammered it home big time. He was literally fitting for days, probably causing yet more damage to his brain. Tough old bastard. And then it was the first time I think I had whiskey, because Ken, ex-Royal Marine cook, so although he boasted about it, I doubt he ever really fired a weapon in anger. If he did, he wasn't talking about it, and most of them don't, so I don't know. Sorry, I need a tissue. And excuse me, Halfdan Snotbeard here. his driving licence had been in doubt. They suspended it, but my father was unable to drive for well over a year after this, with such serious epilepsy. So my mother, who'd never even contemplated driving, suddenly had to learn to drive. And she did it, bless her. But all of a sudden, I think for my father, it was a very humbling experience. All of a sudden, he couldn't drive, and he'd always driven us everywhere. I still remember years beforehand, family holiday to Cornwall, I think. We were at Boscombe, with the place that got flooded a number of years ago. There was the Witches Museum there. And my father poo-pooed it. Poo-poo. Well, basically, he just dissed it and reckoned it was a load of old rubbish, for my American viewers. And later on in Boscombe, we were walking down by the quay, the waterfront where the boats would be. And I think I was involved again as usual. Or Mum, I can't remember which way it was splashing my younger brother because he was very young at the time. And he screamed. And my father was on top of about a 6 foot to 8 feet harbour wall. And he spun round so quickly, hearing his own child scream. It's a good thing that he fell off the bloody wall down onto the rocky. Tide was out, you see, down onto the rocks below. He broke his foot, but he still, in great pain, drove back from Cornwall to Suffolk. The man was remarkable for the sheer willpower he had. I admire him for that. The pain he must have been in. He was very angry and he was swearing all the time, and it was a bit of a tense journey, but he bloody well did it. You got to admire that grit and determination and pain tolerance. But anyway, suddenly he couldn't drive. It changed him. In some ways he became less angry, in some ways he became more, but that was the effect that the brain damage he sustained had on him. His temper did become more erratic for a while. He'd always had a temper, but I could only remember a few occasions where he'd ever accidentally taken it out on me, especially, being the more awkward and disruptive of the two children. Really, Alex? Yeah, she's about, she wants feeding, but I'm not going to feed her till after 5 o'clock at least. Otherwise, she'll be wanting her tea early and hassling us. But, it was a humbling experience for him, I think. And for my mother, it was a freeing experience, learning to drive. All of a sudden, she was an independent woman. And this is something my mother had never really been. Not that my father would have stopped her. She worked 2 part-time jobs. And she always had done. Fairly menial jobs. Washer-upper and cleaner in the hotel in Needham Market. Shop assistant in the local baker's. Cleaner at a rich old lady's house, which she still does currently, that last job, which is where I ended up being being a groundsman stroke gardener for many years on and off. Lovely place to work. Really enjoyed it. So then he had epilepsy for the rest of his life. And there were various issues over the years with balancing his medication. So he had several fits. That old boy put up with a lot. And eventually he regained his driving license. He fought hard to get that back because he identified that as part of being a man, I think. He was the kind of man that would always try and fix things himself. He wasn't always very good at it. Bit of a bodger, and I've inherited that trait. A lot of my work is make do. I do understand that. You know, I've inherited a lot from my father. Not all of it's good, but you have to take the good. I've inherited his temper and his fierce protectiveness. He always had a very fierce streak of protecting what was his. I still remember when I was at primary school, so this is late 1970s. There's one nasty old bugger of a teacher, because it hadn't been long since corporal punishment. I nearly said capital then. Since corporal punishment was still allowed in schools, and it was still a bit of a grey area, and some teachers took advantage of that. Coffee. And he, well, this teacher at one point, he used to single me out because he didn't like me. He used to try and teach me to write with my right hand because I was a lefty. Still am when it comes to writing, but I'm fairly ambidextrous with other things. And so he treated me like a freak. I've had that at various points throughout my life. And at one point, because I'd basically told Mum how he treated me, and I think Dad was on his way to have a word with him. And I'd been being my usual naughty, disruptive self. And this old bastard picked me up by my ears. And my father walked in the classroom, and they made eye contact, and my father just stared at him. And Mr. Hill put me down. And there was a very quiet but angry discussion, and he never touched me again. And I thank my father for that. He didn't have to kick off against him. I think he just said a few choice words. Because my father, like myself, was quite an intimidating individual. He was much less vocal about it than I am. There was a lot of anger in him, which he contained. And I follow his example. That anger will never go. I don't think it's too late for that. There's too much going on in the world, too much I see every day that keeps stoking that furnace. But the thing is to use it positively, to find outlets for it that harm no one else who doesn't deserve it. Yeah, I'm not that good, am I? But that's me. I mean, my father, over the years, he toyed with watercolour painting. There are sketchbooks in the drawer at home about from when he was a child of the most spectacular pencil sketches of old galleons, you know, with cannon. Beautiful. And that is why on his gravestone, which they've yet to properly put up, so I've got to push for that, I think. It's a nickel. Indian head. Focus and buffalo. Be very familiar to my American viewers. My father got it from somewhere, and now I keep it, in my fireplace. It's a wall hanger. It's not a proper katana. So therefore, although it's a legal grey area in this country, whilst we've been dealing with the police, I have been discreetly removing it from display when I know there's police likely to perhaps come in and talk to us. But I mean, things like my reenactment kit, I've been very honest about the fact that it's lying around the house and it's pretty much on display. And, the British police are okay if you're honest with them a lot of the time, I find. I've never really met any bad ones. I remember one time many years ago after I got mugged outside my local corner shop while drunk. You're always vulnerable when you've been drinking too much, and that is something I always bear in mind. It's why these days, if I'm out drinking, unless I'm with company, I very rarely go further than my side of town. Stomach growling. I ate loads last night as well. Where was I? I've lost the thread. Yeah, anger. That's an important thing. If you are blessed or cursed with that angry energy, you have to find a way of directing it that doesn't damage your relationships with those close to you. This is an important fact. This is the note I'm going to end on. Anger doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing if it can fuel something creative and positive. Use that energy, convert it into something good. Learn that, and you will be a better man or woman for it. Find something that focuses that energy. For me, it's reenactment / martial arts, which, by the way, I've never got a qualification in. I never intend to. That complicates matters. So don't ask me about any particular style of martial arts, because I'm not formally certified in any of them. But yeah, that is why I'm so glad to be back in reenactment groups. It is a positive and healthy thing for me. As a very proactive and energetic and, to a certain extent, angry man. And I shall hopefully continue to do it for many years to come. I think my father could have benefited from something like that, but, you know, he was very set in his ways. No, he went to the gym. He went to the gym till about 5 or 6, 7 years before his death, I think. He was very fit for his age. And I've inherited those genes, and I'm grateful for that. So, you know, if you do have issues with anger management, find a way to manage it positively. Don't view it as a curse. Find a way to direct that energy into something good, something positive. And at 30 minutes, I shall try and end it there. Miggy, hello. I always try and say hello to the latest commenters. My last video commented as, you know, that what would your neighbours think if you took some of your reenactment stuff out of the house? They'd think, there's a man not to be messed with. But most of them know I do that. I'm very open about that. And most of them are used to seeing me load up cars and taxis with interesting looking equipment. Some of them I've actually showed some of my equipment to. And they're like, all right, cool. In a kind of like initially weird way. But once people accept what you do, because it's quite a common thing for people to be involved in this in the UK. A bit like, you know, how it's very common in America for people to be involved in, say, American Civil War reenactment. Well, yeah, and this is the thing. The more honest you are with most people, the better it is, I think. I've built up quite a level of trust and friendliness with an awful lot of very middle-class people around here, because it is quite a mixed neighbourhood. Further that way is much more working class. Further that way, there's a very posh private school and very big old houses and very middle-class people. So yeah, other than the shenanigans that's been going on, it's still a fairly nice area to live. And I'm grateful for that. But anyway, I've gone on long enough, so I hope some of this was useful to perhaps maybe people who worry about their anger. And some of it was entertaining. What are you doing, Alex? Can you hear her? She's rummaging around with somewhere because I haven't fed her. I think I better get on with that, actually. So you guys take care. Speak soon. Stay positive. Use that energy in a positive way. Direct it. That's all for now.